another video for Candida Hub. In this video, we'll be talking about why you seem to keep getting yeast infections. Well, it's no secret that recurrent vaginal yeast infections affect a lot of women. In fact, approximately 138 million women each year are affected by recurrent vaginal yeast infections. And some women can have these symptoms for 1 to 2 years, others may have it for 4 to 5 years, and still others may have it for decades. So it is a very common and very real problem for many women. So don't feel like you're alone in struggling with repeat Candida attacks in the vaginal area. Well, if you'd like to learn about a very fast natural cure for yeast infections, you can just skip to the end of this video. But for now, let's go into some of the research that states some of the things that may be causing you to get repeat yeast infections. A 2003 study published in the journal Drugs stated that there may be many different host and microbiological factors responsible for giving yeast infections repeatedly to women. Now, of course, host factors means personal factors to the woman herself. And some of these factors include the use of antibiotics, immunosuppressive drugs, having an immunosuppressive disease, or using an estrogen-based drug. The study also states that resistant Candida strains, that is, strains that have a resistance to some type of drug, may be responsible for a woman to have recurrent yeast infections. A 1990 study published in the American Journal of Public Health looked at some of the risk factors that may be associated with recurrent vaginal yeast infections. The study looked at stress levels, diet, personal hygiene, and sexual behavior. The study found that the strongest risk factor for women to develop recurrent yeast infections was, in fact, sexual behavior. And that behavior was having sex 7 or more times a week. Now, as we discuss on Candida Hub, sexual intercourse alone may not actually elevate a woman's risk. Research that delineates sex into various sex acts shows a more clear pattern, and it seems that when a woman receives oral sex, that is a key reason why her risk for developing a yeast infection increases. Also, a woman who masturbates with saliva can also have a very strong increase in her risk for developing a yeast infection. So the more specific research seems to indicate that saliva on a woman's genitals is actually the key reason why the risk for having a yeast infection goes up. So it may be slightly ambiguous when you hear this study reporting that having sex 7 or more times a week increases your risk, but research does indicate that sexual intercourse alone doesn't really do that. It's more the saliva on the woman's vagina that seems to elevate the risk. So if you have frequent sex, you may just want to stay away from receiving cunnilingus or doing anything too extremely with saliva in the vaginal area. And there's a link in the description to our video on sex and yeast infection, and you can learn about this topic more by watching that. A 2006 study published in the Clinical Microbiology newsletter states that recurrent yeast infections seem to affect a lot of women in their reproductive years. And according to this research, yeast cells seem to primarily get into the vagina by moving there from the anus. The study states that the rectal ampulla, which is generally the part of the rectum which is right above the anus, this rectal ampulla can become home to yeast, and eventually the yeast invade the anus, and from there they go to the skin around the anus, and finally they can travel into the vagina. So we can see that getting rid of Candida in your digestive system may be a really key and perhaps the most important thing you can do to stop getting so many yeast infections. And we have a whole article on Candida Hub that discusses gut yeast infections. The study also discusses various risk factors for developing recurrent yeast infections, and you can find out more on our article about this topic on Candida Hub. So how do you go about getting rid of a yeast infection? Well, on Candida Hub, we have a lot of information about natural remedies such as herbs, essential oils, and other items that you can use at home to get rid of a yeast infection. It's a lot to talk about, so we won't include it in this video. If you're interested in finding out more information about this specific topic of why you're getting recurrent yeast infections, there is a link in the description to our article on Candida Hub that has a lot more information about this topic. And there are plenty of professional sources cited that back up the claims that we make on this page. And while you're there, you can also learn about a very fast 12-hour cure for yeast infections that will get rid of them, yes, in just 12 hours and keep them gone for good. So if you think that's something you'd like to learn a little bit more about, feel free to visit the page on Candida Hub. All right, hey, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you get better very soon. See ya.